All right. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm kind of blown away. I was telling our panelists about how many people registered for this event today and are here today. So thank you all so much for being here to join this discussion. It's really amazing. This is our Talking Teen Services series that the Colorado State Library facilitates, which is a series of webinar and panel discussions hosted by us on topics relevant to library professionals working with teens in your communities of service. And so today's topic is teen volunteer programs. So my name is Kate Bruner. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Youth and Family Services Consultant at the Colorado State Library. And I was really fortunate to be able to recruit some really great panelists today. So I'm going to ask the three of them to introduce themselves. Then I'll share a little bit about how we're going to structure the panel today and some of the accessibility features that we have available on Zoom, should you want to take advantage of them. And then we will jump into our discussion. So I'll ask Andrea, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Hamilton. I am the Teen Services Librarian at Mesa County Libraries. And this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart because I started my library working journey as a library teen volunteer. So it feels really wonderful to get to pay that forward essentially with teen volunteers. And I've been working with them since 2020. So that was an interesting time. But yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. Caroline.
Hi, I'm Caroline McIntyre. I am the assistant manager at the Eaton Public Library, which is a small rural library about 5 minutes north of Greeley. We have a very robust volunteer program of which I am the coordinator and have a lot of teen involvement. So I was excited to see this and looking forward to talking to you all today.
Great. And Christina.
Hi, my name is Christina Chambers. I'm the branch manager at the Breckenridge Library right now, but I spent 3 years as the teen library technician over at the Silverthorne Library up here in Summit County. I started in 2021, so pandemic times were very strange. And then I was having a really hard time getting teens into the library unless it was for work for some reason. So I started a whole volunteer program, integrated it with our summer reading program, and it's still going. So feels really good. But I've been very involved with libraries since I was a teenager too, and I know how impactful that can be.
Yeah. Yeah, so before we get into talking about all your different amazing programs that you all have designed and are managing in your libraries, just to let everyone know, I'm going to guide the discussion a little bit, and our panelists have designed 5 questions to help us guide our discussion to kind of get at those core things of what helps you launch a program and what you should be thinking about when you design a teen services program. And so in a public library setting, it is our intention for you all to have the opportunity to ask questions as well, like towards the end. So we're going to use those 5 questions to guide the discussion, and then also hopefully be able to take questions as well from you all. So so as you're listening to our panelists, if you have questions for them, just hang on to those, and we'll jump in and have time for that at the end. So we are recording this session, and it will be available on the State Library's continuing education website, librarieslearn.org, within the next week. So I'll also send out an email letting people know that it's up and it's ready. So, but you'll be able to find it there. There are AI captions available, so you can choose to turn those on for yourself if you would like that captioning option. We also have an option for translated captions, should that be something that would be useful for you. You can do that by going to the Show Captions button, which you may need to click the More button first to see the Show Captions option. And then once you see that, when you click on that, it should, in a pop-up window, give you an option to click Enable Translation and click Save. And then you should be able to select the language you would like your captions translated into and click Save again. And I will cut and paste those into the chat in just a second in case anyone would like to take advantage of that option. And let a few more people in from the waiting room. There we go. And it also may be helpful. Remember, you can toggle your view on Zoom. So the view button should be on the upper right of your window, and you can toggle between like seeing everybody in like a gallery view or seeing speaker view so that your picture focuses on the person who's speaking at the time. So just a reminder that you have that option as well. So, okay, to kick off our discussion today, let's start with our why. So, why do you have a teen volunteer program and how do you define success for that program? So, and I'm just going to open that up to any of our panelists who want to jump in first.
I can start.
Great.
So up here in Summit County, we tend to have a lot of teenagers who are just very active and want to be very involved in their community. We do have a pretty small year-round community up here in the mountains, and so pretty much everybody knows everybody, which is so much fun. But we, like I said in my introduction, I started in 2021. I started working, and then we had started to do a few programs and then immediately canceled them because people were getting very sick again. um, and I was doing the teen programming, and so I wasn't able to do any of that until summer came around. We started summer reading program, and I tried to do so many different things for the teens. I tried to start craft afternoons and book clubs and things like that, and they just were not showing up at all. But I was getting inquiries every now and again from parents or teens if we had any jobs, mostly, which we do not have a teen job position in Summit County. But I was like, you are welcome to come in and volunteer. Um, and then I worked with my other teen programming technicians at the time, and we built up we started that summer, I think it was 2022. And we had people come in to help with our summer reading program, come and shelve, come and do like craft prep for story time, all sorts of things. And they told their friends, and it just kind of really spread like wildfire because of that. And I was so overjoyed because I had teens coming into the library and really just finding purpose there. And it led it to they were actually coming to the programs because they'd come to volunteer and they'd be like, oh, you're doing a craft afternoon too. It's like, yes, please just come hang out. So for me, it started off definitely to just get the teens into the library, but then it really built into this really sweet community of just tween and teen volunteers just coming in and hanging out and feeling very valued and like they had purpose in the library, which was so special.
Yeah, very similarly. I can't speak to how it started because I inherited this program that was very robust, but I can speak to how it has grown. In a small community, we have a couple of different roles that we play as a volunteer site. We have it's something for kids to do. It's a way for them to give back. But we also have a lot of teens who have court-ordered community service. There's a bit of an overlap between our library kids and kids who end up having to do community service. And this is a place where they can give back to their community in a meaningful way and see that there are consequences, but also there's a reason to um, act in a way that is building your community because there is value in being a part of a community. And that has been kind of how we have approached using that service that we're getting to both improve the library, but improve the lives of the kids who are doing it. And then we also partner with our special education teacher at the high school and actually have quite a few students who are getting paid job experience from the school, doing volunteer work here, or volunteering just on outright volunteer basis. But it is a good opportunity for them to get some real world experience. And I've gotten to be a, reference for them when they apply for the first job. And that has been a really cool way to build up our community and kind of act as a service as well.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna end up repeating a lot of the same points as Caroline and Christina, but I also inherited my teen volunteer program, and there's the added benefit at Mesa County Libraries that we have a volunteer coordinator. So they do Our volunteer coordinators are awesome. We only have the one at the time, but I've worked with multiple over the years. And they do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like paperwork and onboarding and stuff. So I do a lot of like the one-on-one work with teens of getting them trained and working with them and making sure they're showing up to their shifts. So, but I want to acknowledge like I haven't had to do a lot of that big heavy lifting of getting a volunteer program off the ground. So I've really benefited from a lot of other people's really hard work. But in terms of why, I would say honestly, it's because kids want to. Like they want to give back to their communities. Some of them, they just need something to do and get out of the house and feel like there's a purpose. Some of them are looking to build up their resumes for when they do apply for their first job. Some of them are specifically having to do hours because maybe they're an honor student and that's a requirement for them. So there's a lot of different reasons, but I would say that's the biggest reason in terms of why I think the library should do it and should keep doing it is I think really when I first started out and I encountered teen volunteers, I was like, they need to be providing value to the library. And once I reframed it to we are doing this more as a thing to invest in our teens in our community, to build them up and to help them develop skills, that really rechanged my way of thinking because it can be a lot of work, having a volunteer program, and it can get very discouraging when things go wrong or like outcomes aren't quite what you picture of them shelving things. So reframing it as I am helping this person grow and learn is a really, really helpful way was a really helpful way for me to reframe the why of I am doing this to help teens grow in our community and also because they want to. So,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that to think about all the different reasons that you all have just highlighted that have come to your awareness as to why teens might want to be involved. Because I sometimes think hearing their why is really important and like can really inform what we're doing right in our libraries with teens is like deeply listening to their needs or their whys as well, like what they're looking for too. So okay, so we're talking about like how we're designing or managing or running a volunteer program. So what would you say are some of the most important things to think about when you're doing that planning or designing your program? Like whether or not you're launching a new one or whether or not you're making some tweaks to a program you've inherited. Like what are the most important things to think about when it comes to planning and designing?
As somebody who is involved in like kind of big picture things and managing over all the library, the legality that goes along with it, doing like having a volunteer application that is considerate of releases, getting parental signatures, and then also how it affects your insurance. It actually affects our like CIRSA insurance, so we had to coordinate with our HR people on that as well, which is something I would not have thought of, but is something you need to be cognizant of going forward. And then Christina and Andrea, I think you're a lot more involved with the participating with the teens, so I will let you speak to that other part.
Yeah, the most important things for me when I was starting the volunteer programs up here in Summit County were I really wanted the engagement and to have those like one-on-one conversations with the teens or to show them like to have them join in a guided like leadership role within the library. I started a group called YAC, so Youth Advisory Council, very similar to a tab, just with a different name. To have the teens come in and actually like have that feel like they have that control was really important to me. Other things that I needed to consider was just the timing of when they were going to come into the library. We compete with a lot of other activities. So if they can only come in, Wednesday from 5 to 6, it doesn't really work because it's like an hour before we close, and like that's not helpful. So that was a big one. Communication with parents was very important. We do have legal requirements, like we just need waivers signed by parents, but more independent kids will come in and want to volunteer and like, but you need to do the paperwork part actually. I personally do not require interviews or applications for volunteer positions just because it's a small community, but that is something to think about. If you do, like, you want your teens to show up and you want them to like have that accountability. So maybe you want them to go through an application process. And for me personally, it's just like the most important thing for me is just to like build that connection with the teens. If I can get them in to volunteer, maybe they'll come in for other reasons or tell their friends. And I think it is part marketing and part I approach it like a program, like I would any other teen program. And I think that's just really important for me.
Yeah, a workforce development program, right? Workforce skills program. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I think for me, one thing that I wish I had thought about more when I was rebooting essentially post-COVID, the summer reading volunteer program is um just really being thoughtful about like this will require a lot of staff investment and being willing to consider like do we actually have capacity to do the level of staff investment that people deserve? Because like we are willing to put a lot of time and effort into training staff members, and sometimes we don't always extend that to volunteers. I think we have the assumption they should just know how to do some of these basic things. They might not and you have to be willing to put in that time and effort to train people, in part because like Christina's saying, you got to think about it like a program in a lot of ways of it's not necessarily about use value that you're extracting from your teen volunteers. It's about investing in them.
Absolutely. And I think somebody in the chat asked about being in union environments. That is certainly something you have to consider. I don't believe that any of us are in union environments. But Andrea's point about like, you have to really go through and think, what is it that these volunteers can do and what's our time capacity? Again, not being in a union environment, that is something you'd have to coordinate with them as well. And thinking about tasks that people can do that are not going to be like critical to daily operations. I have between 40 and 100 volunteer hours a month, which is quite a lot. Um, but, and I have to come up with 40 to 100 hours worth of volunteer tasks that are, if they don't show up, it's okay. It's not going to really impact the function of the day. So definitely something to consider.
I think going off what Caroline just said, you have to get the staff that you're working with, you have to get their buy-in too. So if they have projects that again are not essential to daily operations that you can add to your volunteer task list, it helps so much because you might have somebody show up and be like, I need 40 hours this month. And you're like, well, okay, how many like things can you cut out for story time like in that time, like there's just you have to kind of it's like coordinate the coordination is a lot of staff time for sure, but getting your staff, your management, your other people you work with to help out with that is a big deal. Like I do recommend.
Definitely, I agree. And also just to kind of piggyback off of that, I think another thing you got to think about is I'm assuming if you're here, it's because you are at least interested in working with teens if you don't already. I think something to keep in mind is that not all of your staff members are going to be comfortable working with teens. And so that buy-in is really, really important. For whatever reason, a lot of people get really nervous being around teens or working with teens or trying to direct teens. And I think having clear expectations for fellow staff members of what you if you are the person running this or if somebody else is running it, getting clear expectations of like, this is what it looks like to work with teens and making it clear, like they also deserve respect, just like you would give to an adult volunteer. But also like we do hold kids accountable, like, like, hey, you didn't show up to your shift last Friday. What's going on with that? Asking questions. So yeah, I think that's one thing that I wasn't prepared for was like, oh, just because I'm comfortable working with teen volunteers does not mean everyone is, because a lot of people are scared of teens.
Yeah. Right. I was once at a teen services related like conference presentation that was talking about hiring for teen services, and their very first requirement is must like teens. That was it. Three words, right? So yeah, thinking about people's comfort levels and like understaff, I think is super vital. So there are lots of bits and pieces to think about, I think, when we're talking about putting together a program or working through how to refine a volunteer program. And so I really appreciate y'all highlighting a lot of those that have been important to your programs in particular. So I want us to drill down just a tiny bit and really talk specifically about, and this is actually, I think a couple of people have alluded to this in the chat too, but talk specifically about like, how do you determine those tasks, responsibilities, or duties that you're assigning to teens when they come in to volunteer?
I think there are multiple components of this, because I have teens that are there for specific reasons beyond just that they want to volunteer, especially with the community service volunteers. I spend a bit more time with them having just conversations about what it is that they think would be better for the library, because the whole goal is sense of community and belonging. And then with our teens who are coming over from the high school, I like to talk to them about what they want to do for work. And like, for example, we have a teen who really wants to do graphic design. And we have people who do our advertisements and stuff, but there are things where it's like, wouldn't it be fun to have a poster that isn't necessarily like a part of what we are doing for day-to-day operations, but that's something that they can spend time learning to do on our software and equipment, and it does improve the library. So having those conversations, it's great. I know it's not like tenable for everybody. So beyond that, definitely like for last summer, we had the most beautiful summer reading logs. We made individual passports and they're very time intensive. And we did that knowing that we were going to have a bunch of volunteers that could do that. I mentioned that I have a senior class coming to do their volunteer day in a couple of weeks. We don't really have that many tasks, so we're kind of outsourcing. We worked with the town and they're doing an Easter egg hunt. We're like, okay, we can have them come to the library and stuff those for the town. In the past, we've worked with United Way and had a diaper stuffing party at the library for our volunteers. So that way we're kind of connecting with community partners, bringing kids into the library and providing a venue for that important work to happen.
I do think at most libraries there is some kind of volunteer task list. When I started, we had a very, very basic volunteer task list at Summit County, and it was for adult volunteers, teen volunteers, community service workers, basically whoever came in and needed a job to do. Things on that, just again, very basic library things like taking out the recycling, like shredding old applications, like stuff like that. So I did start there. And my first few volunteers definitely came in and would help me. It was a big priority to make it fun. So my very first teen volunteers came in and helped me like decorate for a holiday. Um, which was so much fun. I think it was winter, so we were making like paper snowflakes, putting them all over the place. Like it was so sweet. And after that, we built up to the Yak group, which is like the tab. And that became a little bit more self-guided for my teen volunteers. So basically, what I would do is I would present them options. I was like, we can either, like for this meeting in April, we can plan a summer reading program or like a one-off program for other teens, or we can do like I did blind date with a book once where I just grabbed a bunch of teen books and I was like, let's, write some fun recommendations because that's a volunteer activity because that's something that I would spend my time doing, as a person who works in the library. So I did try and choose some of those more fun, more light activities at first. And then as my group got more comfortable with me and with each other, we started planning these all ages programs. And it's hard to get teens to show up to those as participants. And so I had them come in and volunteer at them instead. And they would come in and they would run games, they would give prizes, they would, if we had snacks or drinks, they would keep an eye on those stations. And that was just a really good way to get them involved with, again, those kind of clear expectations and boundaries. Like, you're going to come in and run this game at our winter carnival. And they were able to just really connect to that. Most of my teens, somebody asked what ages are my teen volunteer programs. I am open from 6th through 12th grade. Most of my volunteers, I would say, are between 6th and 8th grade. Once they hit high school up here, they are so busy. It's really hard for them to come in when it's during the school year. Usually my teens will come in the summer, but during the school year is almost impossible. So I tend to not put a lot of effort and energy into like training on shelving or shelf reading or anything that's a little bit more specialized or takes a long time to learn. I've noticed that with my teens, they're too busy. They've already spent so much time in school, their brains just can't absorb that information as well as an adult volunteer can. And I do, like I said, like, this is a program for me and I want to make it fun for them. I want them to come in and have an enjoyable experience. And so I do tend to focus more on the fun things, like come in and help decorate, come in and let's set up a game for the juniors, like come in and let's get some paint out and make some art for something or create a little prop for a display. Those things that I enjoy about my job that are kind of fun and like off the norm, I definitely try and focus on with my teens.
Yeah, I think for my part, one of the things that I see a lot is I work with teens from 14 to 18 by and large. So that's who our age range is. I would love to have middle schoolers, but that just hasn't been the rule for a long time, so I'm not sure why. Um, I've noticed I get a lot of kids coming in who are needing specific volunteer hours for school. And they do want to give back to the community, but I've actually had kids who are like really, really smart, like going to like Ivy League school, accepted into multiple Ivy League schools. And when they come to the library, they're like, I just want to clean something. They're like, my brain is absolutely fried. I want to do something repetitive that I can see an end result on. And I'm like, okay, yeah, we can do that. And like, that's not true of like most teens, but there are some teens out there you would be surprised who are like really highly motivated in a lot of other sectors who are like, I just need to turn off my brain for a while. So I have kids do deep cleaning because we have a children's area with a lot of toys and just a lot of stuff that gets gross because we serve snacks at our library. And so there's always something that needs to be cleaned. I have them do speak because again, if it doesn't get done that day, it's usually not like something that's like actively gross. It's like we're just deep cleaning, you know? Another thing that seems to be really popular is if you can have multiple volunteers at a time doing craft prep activity, because then you've got a social aspect while you can do something with your hands. So for our lovely little introverts who don't want to talk to people, they've got something to keep them busy. For our extroverts, they can chat with each other while they're doing that at the same time. It's a great opportunity for me to get to know those kids because honestly, I just feel like we as humans for so many centuries were just sitting around in a circle doing a repetitive task together, and we miss that at our core, I think. So I have them do a lot of different things, like craft prepped materials for post story time activities and things like that. I have them go through the old markers and see which ones are dried out. So like you probably do have like long-term maintenance tasks that you would love to get done at your library that you don't have capacity for. And honestly, telling the teens why you're doing it is a huge breakthrough. Like I tell them, hey, there's a lot of norovirus around right now. So we're going to clean this to protect our community's health. We're going to check through these old markers because I need to know if we need to buy more markers because it's really frustrating. And they get it. Like most of the time, people just want to know why they're doing something so they know you're not just making arbitrary busy work for them. I really try and avoid doing that if I at all can, because it's not a good feeling for me and it's not a good feeling for them.
That's a great point. Christina mentioned not having teens do shelf reading because you don't have them for as long. And I totally get that. I will add that I do have quite a few people who they want to volunteer at the library because they want to be in the collection. And shelf reading is actually is good, but sometimes it's kind of more intensive for me to have to go back and check work. So I have like conditional weeding as something that I can have them do. Like, can you go through all of these board books, open them up, pull them aside? Because I promise you, even if you were reading your board books regularly, they're gross. They're gross. And teens are ruthless. Oh my gosh. In a way that adults cannot be. Like if they open a picture book and it's disgusting, they have no problem throwing it to the side. So that is one thing that I have found to be very helpful. And definitely have quite a few teens who take a lot of pride in having been the person who fronted the books, or you know, I have one who's like, if people push back the manga, they're like, that's my section. Like, stop. I just fixed that, which is like amazing because why does everyone always want to shove the manga back? It's sorry, I'm projecting a little bit right now, but I think there's a lot to be said for taking ownership over just the aesthetics of the library as well.
Yeah, I mean, all the things I'm hearing, like there's relationship building, there's skill building, there's like the career exploration of like, what is it really like to work in a library? There's teens taking ownership of the space and like really feeling like they belong to it, like it's their library too, and they have ownership there and agency there. So I think those are all like amazing things like to think about when you're thinking about tasks. And Andrea, I love how you connected that to the why. Like I think we've all four of us have had discussions about that. Like, um, what seems like a menial task, like oh, I'm being picked on by being given this task, right? Like maybe I don't want to volunteer here, but when it's connected to that why, like you're helping protect your community, you're like keeping fresh books out for the babies, like, like whatever the case might be, like, then I think that really, really like helps them see that and connect that. I just think it's a great thing to model. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we like always could be like, this is my why. This is why I do this thing in the world. So I think that's a great opportunity that you're giving them there. So. So when you have these teams come in and you have tasks for them, you've got a plan. What kind of expectations do you have for teens while they're volunteering in your library? And how are those like the same or different for adult volunteers in your library?
Um, I think one thing just to say right off the bat, and this is again one of those things that it's so basic that you think you know it, but you don't. You have to remind yourself, teens are not adults, and many of them that are coming, at least at my library, most of the teens I have coming into the library have not had jobs before, have not had formal jobs. So that is part of the thing. It's like I am teaching them these expectations. And so verbally it's saying like, hey, I do expect you to come on time. I do expect you to let me know if you can't come. I do expect you to be here ready to work, and not like go find your friend who's in the stacks and chat for like a half hour. So I think in terms of communicating those expectations, if I need to bring it up with somebody again, just offering them a little bit more grace. And because again, they're not adults. They haven't had our senior volunteers who come in often have like decades worth of experience in professional environments and they're familiar with those expectations. But it's easy to forget like teens don't always know just like the basic thing like, hey, please don't like text like the whole time you're at work, please. Like I need you to not do that. Like that wouldn't fly at a real workplace and I need you to do things while you're here. So, but again, extending some grace because maybe literally nobody has ever told them that because maybe they're homeschooled and their parents don't care that they do that. So
Yeah, definitely. And I think I know you have the conversation ahead of time, right? Where you tell them what is expected of them, but you do have to reaffirm that over and over again. It's just the nature. And that it is that way with adults too. Everybody needs second chances to be reminded of things. I know one thing that has been very important to my director, and so that's something that I've had to enforce, is that you're representing the library when you're volunteering. We have a volunteer tag that you have to wear You have to be behaving in a way that is consistent with a representative of the library. And that has been hard sometimes to communicate, especially when an adult's expectation of what a good representative is not meeting what a teen's expectation is. So sometimes, you know, as the person who's coordinating that, you have to act as the intermediary, which, yeah, maybe not everybody likes teens or not everyone has the same expectation of how they should behave, and doing a lot of explaining to both parties why this actually is a good solution. And that can be difficult for sure.
This is by far the hardest thing about coordinating teen volunteers is making sure your expectations are clear and fair, like following through on them with your teens, but then also showing them a lot of grace because it is the library, it is not school. They don't necessarily need to be doing it. It is a voluntary position. It is they don't communicate like adults, and so you can't assume that they read your email because they don't check emails like adults. You can't assume that they are clear on what their expectations are. I do a lot of check-ins with my teens while we work together. And I also just really don't take it personally when they just stop talking to me or responding or showing up. I know that they have stuff going on in their lives. I mentioned before, a lot of my volunteers are younger, so they don't drive yet. They can't just come to the library on themselves. Just another thing to keep in mind. I think there just has to be a lot of grace. I've had multiple teen volunteers who've come in and they have maybe done a couple shifts and then like never came in again, but I'll see them in public and I make sure to very especially like don't treat them any differently. Like, you know, just how are you? Like, how's life? Like, I don't want to make them feel bad that they couldn't do this thing. But when teens do start, we don't have an application process at my library, but when they do start, I do sit down with them, or spend as much time as I can with them, and we go on a tour of the library and I do an orientation, and I try to very clearly explain that the library is not school, but it's still important to a lot of people. And I want you to be involved, but you have to actually be communicative with me. So I'm not putting all of this time and effort in. And being clear on that is very helpful, I think. The other thing that has been really helpful for me is getting the parents on like my email lists and reminder lists. When I email my teen volunteers, they just don't see it. We don't do texting, we don't do personal phone numbers here. Like it's all through email usually. But having their parents on those emails helps so much because then there's actually like, oh, we can coordinate a ride, or oh, we can figure this out on that day. But yeah, the expectations is hard. I also want the library to be fun. I think I mentioned that. And so I try not to do too heavy of expectations. My big one when I was started the YAC group was they could only miss one out of every 3 meetings, or we'd have to like have a talk. So having like a harder rule like that was pretty helpful. We only met once a month, so like I felt like that was fair.
Yeah, and I mean, you can have fun on your like expectations, right? Like that our goal is to have fun together too. That could be one of your expectations. Like they don't all have to be thou shalt nots. Like they can be like these are things we are going to do together as well.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I do want to
Yeah.
say, like, I mentioned before that I have different expectations and kind of different processes depending on why they're there.
Yeah.
But also, especially with people who are there for court ordered or teens who are coming from the special education teacher as recommendation from the high school, I do have a conversation about accommodations or things that I need to know. And also, sometimes my teens will tell me, hey, I can't really be around this person when I'm doing volunteer service. And that stuff is really good to know ahead of time. I've had situations where I wasn't told and it kind of blows up. Or I have a volunteer who, you know, perhaps needs an accommodation and didn't feel comfortable telling me. So having had a couple of those, I've really instituted those frank conversations, especially for teens who are required to be there or are going to be there for an extended period of time. In the same way as an employer, I like to make sure I'm taking care of the people who are my employees.
We did have a question in the chat, Andrea, actually, like specifically for you, but I'd love to hear from anybody that kind of relates to this expectations piece. So I just want to pull that out for a second, related to like training. So when you are setting those expectations and you're bringing new teen volunteers in, how do you approach that? Like with your teen volunteers, like what does training look like? What's on your
Yeah.
agenda? Yeah.
So for us, training is kind of a lengthy process just because of how we do our summer reading, just because we have a lot of volunteers who want to do it. And um, so what we typically do is we have an orientation before summer reading kicks off, and we try and gather as many teens together to go over. We have a basic volunteer orientation, and then we try and cover some stuff, but then I will do some one-on-one training with people on the day when they come in for their first shift. So the volunteer orientation is a nice environment when you're in this kind of bigger group. So it feels less targeted in some ways when you're saying things like, hey, please don't use drugs or drink at the library. It feels less targeted than in some ways where they're like, if you were having that one-on-one conversation with somebody, they'd be like, oh, are they talking to like me specifically? Because they think I will have a problem with that. It's like, no, this is just something we have to say to everyone. So that can be helpful in like, this is a group setting. We're all just kind of having these norms expressed to us. And then I try and repeat some of the big ones that I feel like are more specific when I'm doing those one-on-one trainings with people. I do have a checklist. I have a volunteer training checklist that I use with some of my fellow staff members where we go through all the things because it's just easy to forget, like communicating basic stuff sometimes. Like I have a customer service training that I do for summer reading volunteers because they're helping sign people up, because I realized that we weren't training people on that. And I wasn't telling kids like, hey, when people come up to the desk, you need to say hello to them. Like, and because they would just stare at them like terrified bunnies. But anyhow, like that's an example of I do actually have training, and in those I try and sometimes reiterate some of those expectations of like, hey, just so you know, if you can't make it to something, here's my contact information again in case you lost it since last time we spoke. So you can let me know if you can't make it. So it's just kind of a way for me to have a more casual one-on-one where I'm reinforcing those expectations. And yeah, share I yes, I can share the checklist towards the end. It is very specialized to my library because of the thing how our summer reading program works, but I'm happy to share it with you. And I think it's just a really helpful thing because we do that for staff at my library. We have a training checklist, so I think it's good to have one if you're doing volunteers as well.
Yeah, and we can include that with the recording, Andrea. If you're comfortable with that, we can take that and upload it to the landing page on Libraries Learn as well. So, any other anything to share, Christina or Caroline, when it comes to training?
I try and do as much one-on-one training as I can because for me, it's really important to like have that connection with the teen and figure out their specific needs and accommodations, things like that. I think sometimes the teens up here, especially if they're community service or court ordered, they don't necessarily want their peers to know that why they're spending so many hours at the library, and so that can be even more one-on-one work or even more like private work, if that makes sense, to protect their privacy and their stuff. I do in before summer reading program, usually like mid to late May, a bigger summer reading volunteer orientation. So it's usually about an hour, hour and a half. And I just talk about like the different age groups that we have for summer reading. Like we assign kind of roles, figure out our times and dates, our schedule for the 2 months that we do summer reading. That is definitely a way more structured situation. So, and again, like Andrew was saying, it's just because we get a huge influx. Like it's just way easier for me to set aside a couple of hours in that month to try and get as much information across as possible. And then when they do come in for their first couple of shifts, I do lots of check-ins and lots of, did you have a question about this? Do you know why we're doing that? The biggest thing I think with doing the teen volunteers is you're gonna be putting in more time than they are. But it's not about that's what it's about. It's about you building this program and having that relationship with the teens. It's not about getting free labor for your library.
Okay. So, we also, this is connected. Our next question is actually connected to a couple things that have come up in the chat as well. So I know people are interested in this. How do you hold your teen volunteers accountable? And like, how do you manage those difficult conversations when those expectations aren't necessarily being met?
Yeah, I think it really differs from teen to teen. Obviously, that is one great reason to build a relationship like Christina was talking. You absolutely can, because then you're not just coming down as this arbitrary hammer on them. Um, I usually try and touch base with the teens, and I try and have a private conversation with them. And by private, I mean we're still in an open space in front of cameras and stuff, because we shouldn't be going into private rooms with teens by just one staff member, but I try not to do it in front of the other teen volunteers is ultimately my point. I find a different area of the library and I sit down and I'm like, hey, so I've just noticed these things have coming up, and I'm just kind of curious what might be going on. So I think approaching it with curiosity, because again, I think the thing to remind yourself is, again, volunteering is a privilege, but it is also something that kids are donating their time for. Like, they are providing this value to their community. Even if most of the value is we're trying to invest in them, like, they are volunteering their time. And so they can stop if they want to. So I think it's good not to be too aggressive, but also to ask questions about, like, hey, so what's going on? Oh, you haven't been coming because like your car broke down. Okay, that totally makes sense. Just in the future, please let me know. I have actually had to fire a volunteer once before, and that wasn't fun. But luckily, I was able to work with my volunteer coordinator to kind of broach some of those difficult conversations. But we only ended up asking them, we didn't really fire them as a volunteer. We just had them move to a different volunteer opportunity that we thought was a better fit for them, because this volunteer would not stop checking their phone, like, just constantly while they're at a desk, where they're expected to work with people. And so, we tried accommodations and we approached with curiosity. After a while, we just realized this isn't the best fit for this person. So we were able to, fortunately, that worked out well. She was able to get moved to a spot that was better for her. But that's like kind of a best case scenario if you're gonna have to fire a volunteer. But yeah, I think approaching with curiosity is best, but I think don't jump to like firing volunteers, but like be prepared that it is a thing that you might have to do, and that I think you need to be okay with that idea, if it reaches that.
Andrea, I think you're a lot nicer than I am. All of that is lovely. I will say that I am pretty tough but fair kind of person in a lot of regards, with especially with court ordered volunteers. I'm like, if I am signing a legal document saying that you are here working, you need to be doing the job that you're here to do. And that usually works pretty well. There is some transactional nature to that that's a little different than just a volunteer coming in. And similarly with our TAB members, there is a prestige to being involved in TAB. And so I think that there's a higher standard that we're held to. With just our regular teen volunteers that are there for fun to help out because they have mom's not picking them up for another hour and they're bored. If they're not actually volunteering or being productive, I'll say, hey, I'm going to have you sign out. Let's try again tomorrow. And I have no problem with that. And it's not a, hey, you're not good at this, or like you're a problem right now. Just, it doesn't really seem like you're in the headspace to volunteer. Let's try again another day. So yeah, very different for different situations. And then I have had issues with having to not fire a volunteer, but fire the helper who was there for the volunteer in a way, and have like a very difficult conversation with them because they are an adult who is there to help a teen with developmental disabilities to do a task. And in that scenario, I am certainly not their boss, but I'm not going to accept that behavior. And I feel very differently about those conversations. I've had many hard conversations with teens, but I think your point about pulling them aside and having those not be a social, like you don't want other teens to be a part of that. It's I'm the adult. I'm going to enforce this as the adult, and I think that's a healthy relationship to have. So yeah.
I suppose I would be somewhere in between you two in my approach.
And that is why
I
we have 3 panelists from 3
right.
different libraries.
I do like as far as accountability goes, I do check in with my teens often. And I do adjust as much as I can. So if I have a teen, like I used to try to train the teens on shelving, and like it because they love that idea of just, putting books on the shelves and being pretending to be a librarian for a little while. And I get it. I completely understand. But that doesn't mean that they can do it correctly because if they can only come in for 2 hours a month, like that's not helpful. They're going to forget. And so making those adjustments and working with them has been really helpful for that accountability. Being like, hey, you say you're going to come in and show, but it's too hard. So you're just coming in and not doing it. What is something that you can actually do when you come in? Making that adjustments. And I've never had to fire a volunteer, which is great, but I have had to have a lot of really tough conversations with parents who are dropping their sixth graders off for hours at a time to volunteer. And I'm literally just babysitting at that point. And so for me, it's not about the teens or tweens um, not being accountable. It's about their parents not understanding the role that their teens are playing in a lot of the times. Um, I also I have this one teen who I've known for years now, and he really thinks that he can do shelving, but he has never passed a shelving test. He won't study, he won't come in and practice. And so that one's been hard. We've had multiple conversations, and I finally realized that he did not tell his mom that he cannot come in and shelve. And so she was just dropping him off to come shelve, and then he was just playing video games or whatever. And so he and I had to have like a really, really, and that was a tough, like one-on-one conversation with him and me and being like, hey, you are not doing this correctly. And it feels like nobody is benefiting from the way that you're doing this. And it's hard because this kid is so young. He's only in sixth grade. But that is such an important like life skill and communication skill, and to set those expectations as he gets older. And this is his first time volunteering regularly. Um, it is a lot of work on our end, but I think it's so important. And again, I know I mentioned this earlier, sometimes you just got to let it go. Like we want the teens to be accountable. We want to guide them and help them in that way, but they're not adults. They're gonna be distracted by something at some point and just not show up, and it is not a personal thing.
Yeah, having been in a school as a school librarian, I think one of the biggest lessons I learned from teachers is like you can discipline a kid, and at the end of it, they still know that you like them, and that's important. Like if you are having those tough conversations and you're really expressing like I dislike what you're doing, they should leave this conversation still sure that you as the adult like who they are as a person. And that has always been a guiding principle. It kind of sounds like you're expressing a similar, like making sure they feel seen as a human being and cared for.
Yeah, I really hold on to that idea of there are no bad kids, there are kids having bad days, right? So we talk about what's going on the bad day and the behavior, and
Mhm.
and we still make sure that kid knows that we know that they're a good human being, like we want to continue to stay connected with. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. I think, yeah. But at the same time, like Caroline was saying, like that behavior is not going to fly. So
Right.
either
Right.
like we
Boundaries
do
are
it
good.
we do something another day, or
Yeah.
just like, yeah, this isn't for you. And that's okay.
Right.
But yeah, not like you are a bad child and you should flee here in shame and never come back.
Right. Yeah. So we've talked about the difficult conversation piece and the dealing with challenging behavior piece, but how do you acknowledge and celebrate your teens when they show up and do really good work? And like, how do you incentivize them?
All the praise, all the praise, and authentic. I think that's a big thing, is because we all know kids and teens can smell inauthenticity. But yeah, volunteers get paid and praised. And so I think being friendly, like we do with any other patron, but also like calling them out when they're doing something good in front of their peers. Remember, like, we want to correct in private, praise in public. I think that's very important, and let them know when they're doing a good job. If you've got the budget for it, snacks, tiny gifts periodically, always a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and we very thankfully do have the budget for it. We include our volunteers, our regular volunteers, in all of our like, okay, we get an end of year gift of like, I think this year we got little Yeti mugs that have our library logo inscribed in them, and all of our volunteers got one too. Again, the regular people who work every week, which we do have people who come every week. Like the summer, if you're volunteering for summer reading, you get the staff summer reading shirt, which always feels cool. I think for the teens, they love to be in charge of, we do treasure chests and they love being in charge of that. And I think they love being like in charge and having that visual representation as well. We do for adults, we do a volunteer spotlight every month in our newsletter. I don't think we do that with any teens, just because there's some privacy issues you run into there. But yeah, that individual praise. I mentioned earlier letters of recommendation. I extend that offer to volunteers that I think are doing a really good job. So if somebody asks, like, do you have metrics for that? I don't. It's just a conversation that I have opened up to them. Like, hey, I think you do a really great job here. If you're applying for jobs in the future, I would love to be a reference for you. Um, so those kind of conversations where I'm, letting them know on a professional level, I think that you are doing really good work. I think that is a very elevated experience for a teenager.
I agree with all of that. I think any incentive, any praise, any recognition that you can just shower on these teens just makes it so meaningful. We have a Volunteer of the Year award, and I just nominated this last year, our first teen volunteer, and she won, which was super fun. We, at the end of summer reading program, we for the last 3 years done a volunteer appreciation activity. And those are completely voluntary. Not all of our volunteers show up, hardly any of them do. But like last year we went to an escape room. The year before that we went on a hike and played like lawn games. And the year before that we went bowling. And those are just, there's something to really look forward to at the end. Most of our volunteers here, they get the volunteer hours for National Honor Societies, their IB programs, different things. So they are already getting that, which I think is kind of the primary incentive in a lot of cases. And then I always have a little like snack shelf for the teen volunteers when they come in, which has been very helpful because when they get overwhelmed and need a break, I'm like, hey, go get a snack. And that seems to help a lot, just to give them that permission to have a few minutes to just take a breather and do that. Because sometimes their programs run long and they're a lot. So that's really helpful. And then I have usually in the past, I'll usually write them a thank you note or some kind of note like when they are done with their volunteer hours or done with their time. Or if they're moving away, because that happens a lot, but it's usually like Caroline said, just like an offer that I can write a letter of recommendation if they ever need it, like any contact information they might need, and just like thank you for your help and the work that you did. I think little things like that really do go a long way.
Yeah, always like ending on that, like, how are we celebrating them piece, right? So we have some time. We set this up for 75 minutes today. I know some folks may need to move on to other things at the top of the hour, but we have some time to take some questions. So I wanted to kind of pull out a couple that I saw in the chat. Someone had mentioned uh, managing or working with kids who are sort of being made to volunteer by a parent. So they don't necessarily like aren't it wasn't their idea, right, to participate in this. So does anybody have any advice for working with the teen or the parent or both in those particular situations?
This happens to me a lot, especially in the summer. Kind of like I mentioned, I had those sixth graders who came in and the parent just kind of dropped them off. That was a situation where I had to have a really tough conversation with the parent about the expectations she had for me as the teen volunteer coordinator. But I also figured out me and the tweens, we had a compromise. So they would come in for their hours, but we would split up their time so they had time to do personal activities and then time to help out. And we eventually figured out that they didn't like the project that I was having them work on most of the time. And so finding them something, like working with them really closely to find something that worked better for them, was huge. I think also it's all in how you present it to the teens. Like, you're not there to enforce whatever punishment or thing that the parent is doing. You're not there for that. You're there to run your team volunteer program. And so to get to communicate with the teens or tweens themselves about your goals, about the reasons why this is important, it's like a little bit like you're selling it to them, and that can be really helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that is something for folks to think about for sure. So Um, I did see someone asked about collecting personally identifying information and whether or not anyone has an official application. And I think you guys talked a little bit about that. I'll just speak to there are some folks in Colorado, in other Colorado libraries, who do actually have like sort of a complete job seeking process that they have their teen volunteers participate in. So they do fill out an application. Like there is a clear job description for them. They fill out an application. They do call them in for interviews. They mentor them. However, I think this is an important piece. They will help them complete that application. They will give them guidance on how to show up for an interview, like do the interview, give them feedback on how they did in the interview. Like, so it is really like this hard, pretty intensive like job skills development process that they have built into, that some folks have built into their programs. That takes extra time and coordination, right? And as far as I think the personally identifying information piece, I think that's a logistics piece that again, like your HR, your admin, like your state, local, if you're city library or county library, like you need to be making sure that you're in alignment with whatever rules, regulations, and policies are applicable to your particular library, I think. So, but there are a lot of ways to approach that application piece. And then I think also developmentally speaking, the age group you're working with, like your application should reflect the like the developmental capacity of the age group you're asking to apply for a job. So
Yeah, and we have an application, and those get kept for 3 years and then shredded. And any given time, somebody else asked about like keeping track. I think we have 100 volunteers who applied this year and over 300 active volunteers. My service area is 8,000 people. So that is a huge chunk. Like it's a very, everybody wants to do it. And that in part, I think reflects the fact that there's just not a lot for kids to do here beyond sports. And there's just not a lot of job opportunities for teenagers anymore. We are actually working with our town of maybe setting up a paid internship through the town, which is sort of different than being through the library and kind of somewhat easier to coordinate. Um, yeah, we do collect that information and it is kept in a secure location and shredded.
Yeah. I'm just going to drop in the chat here. This is the portal for our volunteers that we use for everyone, but we do also use a lot of paper still, but the paper is then uploaded to this volunteer portal and shredded and stuff like that. So it is through this particular volunteer management software. Um, I didn't pick it. I don't know how much it costs or anything, but I will say it has been helpful. And, you know, I like that it offers an online option because in our area, a lot of teens will just lose paper forms the second you hand them to them, and they really just want to be able to do this on their own time. I really like that it has an option where we still get the parental consent sign offs on everything like that. And it's all digital and things like that. So we try and keep it flexible. I've got kids who only track on paper and I input it for them. And but I try and encourage kids to do it online. And a lot of kids seem to enjoy that because this is also a good way for them to find out about new volunteer opportunities. So if anyone wants more information, I will share my contact information, but I will probably have to direct you to our volunteer coordinator, Kim, who is the the wizard who controls the software.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I saw someone mention QR codes at their libraries for clocking in and clocking out. So like also having like, how are you tracking that information as well? Like, do you guys just have like, I'm signed in on a clipboard, like a nice analog version, or like, are there ways that you're tracking when people are coming in, when they're leaving, how many hours they're doing? Like, do you guys have particular systems for that you feel work well besides Andrea's like online system they've got?
We just have a 3-ring binder with hour log
Yeah.
sheets at our library, but it's something that is really helpful. Like if I'm not there, that the teens can be accountable for it. They can fill in spaces if they forgot to record something. And then it's something really easy for me to scan and email if they needed to go somewhere.
Yeah, we do paper sheets as well. And we like compile that. I don't know if it's for PLAR reporting or just because we compile that information. We don't keep the data of like who clocked in, but total volunteer hours. And then for anybody who I have who's doing that through the school where they're getting paid, I can't remember what the acronym is. I should have memorized that before I did this panel, but I keep those, I keep a separate log of them. And for any court-ordered community service, I also keep a separate log of those in a secure place because there is a big consequence if they lose their sheet of paper and they can't verify their hours. So I want to be able to say, yes, I have it. And I think I'm the only person who does a lot of the court ordered community service. But this is a huge part of our volunteer program. Just want to add that something I should have said earlier about celebrating teens is I email the judge if a teen is doing a great job volunteering. That is something that I think is really important. I could also do that if they're not doing a great job volunteering. I personally have that conversation with them because I don't want to be impacting their permanent record negatively, but I will always celebrate them in that way.
I love that. That's a really special like gift you're giving them. Like that just it's amazing. No. I know, I think sometimes it's a lot easier to like kind of dial in on the challenges as opposed to uplift those. So really like being very mindful about uplifting their and celebrating their successes, I think is really a crucial piece. So, okay, so somebody had a question about do you allow volunteers to apply or be onboarded continuously, or do you only open up applications like once per year or once per season? And then do you have them reapply like when it's a new season?
We do continuous based upon what opportunities are available. So if you look at the website, there will be specific opportunities that are available. Some of them are not open to teens. A lot of them are. And so if all of those positions are full, we're like, yeah, you're welcome to apply and like have your information on the record and we can like pass through all those things, but we don't actually have anything for you to do right now. And so that's kind of nice because then when opportunities do open up, then we can like send an email blast to everyone in a certain range of interest because people say what they're interested in doing. Then we can be like, hey, this thing opened up. You should check it out. I don't know what the hit rate is on it, but it's a thing we can do. So that's nice.
We take ours continuously up here because it seems to come out in waves. So usually in the spring when students are trying to finish their hours that they need for the next year by the end of the year, we'll get tons of inquiries. I do try and accommodate as much as I can depending on our work. And then we do actively advertise and get teen volunteers started right before summer reading program starts because it is such a help to have a crew of teenagers who are just a little bit older than the kids like participating to like come in and help keep an eye on things. You know, one person running a program for 30 kids sometimes is a lot. So to have a few other eyes and ears about, very helpful. But I try really hard not to turn any teen volunteer away also because often it's for a very short period of time. And we don't have a formal application process. It's really just case by case.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that occurred to me is do you have any thoughts on recruiting? You know, you're talking about people coming in or being directed to the library. Are there any things you do to like market your teen volunteer program or make sure that you're kind of going out and making sure teens in the community are aware it exists and
Yeah,
yeah, anything
somebody
like that?
had asked in the chat too about starting a program like this, and I think the advertising and the outreach is so important. I do recommend, I don't know if flyers work everywhere. They're huge in our community. You put a flyer up and like people are gonna see it. But we very much advertise. You get your volunteer hours for school or any special programs you're in. There are prizes, snacks, events. Like you have access to kind of like this inner working. But we are very upfront and blatant, just like come in and you'll get all of these benefits.
That's fantastic.
Which is a really good way. Just incentivize
Right.
if you
Yeah,
want
from
teens
the
to show up to
get-go, right? Like from the very
anything.
beginning. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will add one more thing. We actually have a really high teen employment rate here in Colorado. And so I think that that is something to be aware of in your community. Like, because if you feel like you're having trouble recruiting teen volunteers, like having that piece of information might be something that would be important to have because if you do have high employment, especially like during the summer, then like adjusting your expectations or figuring out how to structure your program in a way that might accommodate teens who are also working who might be interested in volunteering and or are also working. So it's something to think about. So I'm going to ask our panelists if they'd be willing to drop their contact information into the chat because we're wrapping up. I do want to say a huge thank you to them for coming along for this ride and being panelists. I also want to highlight that real quick that we have an upcoming webinar on March 6th where we're going to take a deep dive into one library in particular's program. And they run a year-round program that's a partnership between their children's and teens librarians. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for that. I just put the link for that in the chat. And then if you have time, we do have a short feedback survey. We use this for feedback on our programs and what else we could be offering and how we could do a better job here at the State Library. It is also what we use to send to the Institute of Museum and Library Services about what we are doing with the federal funding that funds the State Library in Colorado. So if you have an opportunity to do that, I'm always very appreciative of any feedback folks have to offer. And we have recorded this session. I would say probably give us about a week to get it up on Libraries Learn, the same page you registered for it on. And I will send out an email to everyone who registered and put it on our Colorado Youth Services Library Network listserv as well once the recording's ready. So thank you again to our panelists. Thank you everyone for being here today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Bye,
Thank
thanks.
you. Bye. Oh, and sorry, one last thing. Kate, just since there was interest in the training document, is that something that could be added to the website
Absolutely.
with
Yeah,
the recording? Okay,
sure.
fabulous.
If you
So in
just
case
send it to me.
anybody's looking for that,
Yeah,
it will be up there. It gives me a little time to polish it. So
yep, no worries.
cool. Thank
That'll
you
be
all.
great. We'll collect up any resources you all want to send. We can collect them up and put them up with the recording.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
everyone.